Begin. So good afternoon. My name's Sam Gralty. I'm the events manager with Vermont Land Trust, and welcome to Little Lives on Big Trees, What to See in Stick Season. Thanks so much for joining us. If you're not familiar with Vermont Land Trust, we're a membership organization dedicated to protecting farmland, forest land, and community lands across the state. Since 1977, we've permanently protected over 640,000 acres, which equates to roughly 11% of the state. A few brief Zoom reminders before we get started. We are recording this, as I mentioned before, but because it's a webinar, you're not going to be in the recording. If you have any questions for Liz, feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom. You should see it down next to the share button, or well, you might not have a share button. Anyway, it should be at the bottom of your screen. You can enter your questions. If you see one that you're interested in, you can also give it a thumbs up. And you can also respond to other people's questions. We know we have Liz, who's a huge expert in what we're talking about today, but there's other expertise out there. So if you have something interesting to add to somebody else's question, feel free to chime in with that as well. But if you do see an interesting question to you, feel free to give it an upvote. We'll try to do the ones that get more interest at the end. So we hopefully will have time for all questions, but just in case we don't, we'll focus on those. Right now, as I mentioned, I have the chat open for everybody to use, but once we begin, I will be shutting that down so you can only chat with me for tech issues and things. It just is a little distracting if there's too much chat going on. So that will be closing down shortly. But if you do have any tech issues, feel free to reach out to me. And lastly, if you'd like to have closed captions, those are available at the bottom as well. And yeah, now it's my pleasure to introduce Liz Thompson. Liz is a beloved ecologist and botanist who worked with VLT for many years as the director of conservation science. She's the author of the book Wetland, Woodland, Wildland, A Guide to Natural Communities of Vermont, and currently serves as the managing editor of the journal From the Ground Up. She was recently the recipient of the 2025 Sally Laughlin Award presented by the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources for her pivotal role in land and biodiversity conservation across Vermont for more than 3 decades. So please welcome Liz Thompson. Liz, take it away.
Thank you very much, Sam, for that introduction. I want to reiterate what you said, which is that others should certainly weigh in when there are questions. I know that there's lots of knowledgeable people here. So it's great to be here, and welcome to stick season. Stick season, that season between fall foliage and good skiing, I guess we could say. So it's a time when we look out at the woods, look out at the forest, and see bare trees, leaves fallen to the ground, and wonder what kind of life is out there. So the focus of this webinar is Little Lives on Big Trees, What to See in Stick Season. Big trees, I'll talk about why Little Lives on Big Trees. There's lots of things to notice in stick season, but I'm going to focus on just a few groups of organisms. I want to thank a few people who, most of the photographs in the slideshow are my own, but a number of people contributed their wonderful photos as well. And also many people helped me to understand some of these organisms better than I do. Mickey Kolbeck, Annette Seidenglanz, Chris Shorn, Susan Elliott, Sue Williams, Eric Sorensen, and Jeff Pangle. Thanks to all of those people. So I'm going to focus on old forests. And why is that? It's because old forests have lots of features that lead to greater diversity of habitats and therefore greater species diversity in many cases. They have downed decaying wood, tip-up mounds, standing snags, furrowed bark, and therefore a diversity of habitats which yields greater species diversity. So just comparing a couple of different forests in winter, the one on the left is a young forest and the one on the right is an old forest. So on the left, it's a pretty forest with the sunlight shining through, and but the trees are all young and all the same age pretty much. And this is the kind of forest we see a lot of in Vermont. quite young forest to medium age forest. We don't see as much old forest or old growth forest. And in old forest, as is depicted on the right, we see things like fallen trees and tip-ups and complexity, and they look kind of messy, but in a beautiful way. So standing snags are one thing that support biological diversity. And look at this standing dead tree that has fungi and it has mosses on it that you can see, and even lichens. And there's another one, a lot of down dead wood in these forests, which supports lots of different fungi and other organisms. And look at this down log, which has mosses on the top, fungi along the side, and lichens as well. And here's a photo that was actually taken in summer. You can see there's still leaves on some of the trees of a down dead log. And then in old forests, we also have old stumps, which support a lot of biological diversity and a lot of the organisms that we are going to look at today. We have tip-ups, which also just create complexity in the forest and support a lot of different organisms. And then the other thing about old forests is that old trees themselves have complex bark structure. So whereas many young trees have very smooth bark, a lot of older trees have much more complex, furrowed, fissured bark, and that is a place where organisms can grow. Also, in old forests, we have these large tree bases with bases are elevated above the forest floor often. And so there's this complexity of habitats just at the base of a tree. And if you were to stoop down, this is a photo that was taken in a cedar swamp in northeastern Vermont. And if you were to stoop down and really look closely at this tree base, you would see, oh, a half a dozen different mosses and a couple of different vascular plants that still have their leaves because they're evergreen, and just a great deal of diversity. And this is a white pine tree, a very old white pine tree in a black spruce swamp. Again, at the base of the tree, look at all that diversity. There's a lot of lichens at the base of that tree and some mosses. So how are we going to look at these things? Let's just talk for a second about how we look at the three groups of organisms that I'd like to talk about today: fungi, bryophytes, and lichens. So how to look at them? Well, we look at them closely. And I promised that this webinar would be looking closely at some of these things. This is my friend and colleague, Eric Sorensen, who has a hand lens up to his eye, a magnifying lens, and he's looking at a moss in a peatland. And this is what we do. And there's a closer look at the magnifying lens, looking at some little tiny things on the side of a tree in winter. And there's actually, that's one way, that's the common way. This magnifying lens is the common way that botanists look closely at things, and also entomologists, also jewelers. You've seen jewelers use a lens like this. And on the left there is the lens that is my favorite, the Hastings triplet, a Bosch and Lohm lens, very inexpensive item. You can get it easily. The other way to do it, if you don't have a lens with you, is if you have a phone with you that has a magnifying or a macro feature, you can use that. And then another old trick is on the right, there is a boy with his binoculars backwards. So if you look backwards through your binoculars, it's a magnifying lens. It's a close-up magnifying lens. The little boy is my son a number of years ago. So we are going to look at, this is a simplified sort of grade school diagram of the kingdoms of life. When I was in school many years ago, there were considered to be five kingdoms of life. And prior to that, there had been three. Generally speaking, most scientists now recognize six, but some recognize seven and some recognize eight. But this is the most common classification out there right now, six kingdoms of life. So across the top, animals, fungi, and eubacteria or true bacteria, and then on the bottom, plants, protists, and archaebacteria, more primitive bacteria. And I'm not going to talk about the two bacteria types, and I'm not going to talk about animals. So we're going to focus on the fungi, the plants, and the protists. First of all, the fungi. We all know what fungi are. Mushrooms. We can think about them as exemplary fungi. So we're going to look at the fungi, and I just wanted to show you this chart this is the last chart from a technical publication that I will show you, but this one is really great. There was a study that was done that showed that the amount of dead wood in a forest compared to the species count of fungi in a forest there's a direct correlation. So the more dead wood you have, the more dead wood volume you have, the more species you have. And this was a really clear study. And this also, I've seen similar things related to other organisms, but this one was, I thought, very exemplary. So a lot of times, so what fungi really are, the main part of a fungus is actually the part that's underground that looks like this, the mycelium. This is when you dig up, look underneath a mushroom, dig up a mushroom, look at the soil underneath, this is what you will see, the mycelium. And this can cover much, much larger area than the actual fruiting body, so-called fruiting body, the mushroom itself. You have probably heard of Suzanne Simard and her book, Finding the Mother Tree. I highly recommend it if you haven't read it. And she talks about and has really made us all aware of the importance of these fungal networks in the forest. Many, many other researchers have done work on this as well, but these fungal networks are incredibly important in translocating nutrients, in basically keeping the forest alive, translocating nutrients, moving nutrients from one organism to another, sharing nutrients, and actually sharing what might even be called information. So, and I won't go into that now, but I just do recommend reading that book. It's fascinating. But let's look at some common fungi that we might see in the stick season woods. One of them, if you look at this common puffball, this photograph, as you can see, there are leaves on the seedling. This is on a down log, and there are leaves on the birch seedling that is on the down log. There's a lot of mosses in this photograph as well. But this is a common puffball and what it looks like in the summer, late summer. And you can see that little hole in the middle. And that is where the spores come out. You've probably all done this. You probably all poked at a puffball or squeezed a puffball to make the spores come out. So there's a cloud of dark spores when that hole is open. And this is what puffballs look like later in the season, more as we're getting toward winter. But they can still be seen in the woods in stick season. So they've turned brown. The spores have mostly dispersed. But as you can see in some of those, in the openings, the holes on these puffballs, you can see that there are still some spores inside. So these, the puffballs are, I'm starting with some of the more delicate mushrooms and more delicate fungi, things that you will see in the fall, but they won't persist necessarily through the winter because there are a lot of mushrooms, and many of the mushrooms that grow on the ground, the common mushrooms, the honey mushroom and amanitas, many of the common mushrooms, boletes that grow on the ground. You just won't see them in the winter. They are delicate. They're found in the late summer in moist conditions, but their fruiting bodies will wither and not be visible in the winter. Their mycelium, however, is still present underground that whole time and doing its work. But this is one that can be seen in the fall. It's called northern tooth fungus, Climacodon septentrionalis. Now, this is a parasite. So you might be wondering about these things that grow on trees. Do they actually kill the trees? Well, there are of the fungi that grow on trees, and this is where we're kind of headed now in this talk, of the fungi that grow on trees, um, they can be parasitic. In other words, they can actually grow on a tree and kill the tree. Or sometimes, in some cases, some of them are what we call saprophytic or saprophobic. Saprophytic, meaning that they simply grow on already dead wood. And there are some that do both. So this one is a parasite. It is a plant a fungus that will grow on a perhaps slightly weakened tree, but its spores will land on the tree surface, on a complex tree surface like this, on this old maple, and will actually, the hyphae will actually grow into the tree and go into the heartwood and eventually kill the tree. So that's true of this northern tooth fungus. This is the only photograph of a person, I think, except for my son earlier, that I have in this slideshow. And this is Tony D'Amato, who is a forest ecologist at the University of Vermont. We were at a field trip at the Marsh Billings National Historic Site, and he was looking up at this very old sugar maple tree and admiring the tooth fungus on it. So this is, admiring, yes, it's a gorgeous fungus, and also, it's killing the tree, but this is all part of the cycle of life. This is an old tree, perhaps its time has come. And so this is the cycle of life. Another one that is on the delicate side and that doesn't persist through the winter, but it can be visible now growing on trees, is shaggy scaly cap, the genus Pholiota. And it's what's called a secondary parasite. And what that means is that it grows on, it will parasitize trees that are already weakened for some other reason. So a tree might be getting ready to die or weak, and the Pholiota will grow on it and sort of continue the task of killing the tree. So it won't by itself kill the tree, but it will help. And then there's this one. I'm sure you've seen this one. It's a beautiful and common shelf fungus that is seen in the woods throughout our region. This is called Ganoderma artist's bracket or artist's shelf. And that's because you can take one of these and turn it upside down, and you can draw pictures on the underside. And so the artist's bracket is what it's called. Shiny, red top. This was growing on a downed hemlock root in a old hemlock forest that where the tree had fallen over, and this was the tip-up mound. And so it's growing on the root. So this one, the artist bracket, can be either a parasite or a saprophyte. So it can kill the tree, or it can simply grow on already dead trees. A recently down tree is maybe still living, is likely to be still living. There may still be roots in the ground. There may still be life in the tree, at least for a time. So we don't know whether this Ganoderma is growing on living tissue or not. But what we do know is that it got established after the tree had fallen down, because it is because of the way in which it's growing. It's growing. They always grow with the underside to the ground. And there is another view of the same species. It looks really different in this case, but it's the same thing growing on a different tree. And you can see, this is really interesting because you can see something that happens, and this is mostly during the summer rather than the winter, but what is called guttation, which is the exudation of moisture from the base from the underside of a shelf fungus. And this is because there are metabolites. It's not just dripping water. There are metabolites that are pushed out of the fungus due to pressure, and in those drops, these drops are filled with things. It's not just water, but there are all kinds of compounds that are within the fungus that are pushed out with this moisture in these drops. And this fungus has medicinal qualities, and some of the compounds that are medicinal can be found in these droplets. So it's fascinating. Here's another one, a turkey tail, which is Trametes versicolor. And I apologize if you can't see the words on the bottom left, but it says saprophyte or weak parasite. So it is generally a saprophyte. It usually grows on already dead tissue, already dead wood, but it also can be a parasite sometimes. So it's what they call a weak parasite. This is, such a beautiful fungus. I love this fungus, and it looks so many different ways. It is very common in our woods, but it ranges in color from tan to purple to all kinds of colors. And let me just show you a few photographs of this beautiful turkey tail fungus. There's another one. You see you can get quite large, and you can see the stripes on it. I'm sure you've seen that. And there's looking at it straight down with pine needles on it. A closer look. And that needle in the center, there are pine needles, but that little needle in the center is a hemlock needle. And there it is, looking at it. Look, I'm looking at it from the side. This is growing on a dying ash tree. And there's a closer look. So look, the same thing, but it looks many different ways. So here's another one. I'm sure you've seen this one too. This is the tinder polypore or hoof fungus, Fomes fomentarius. And it is a parasite, but it can also be a saprophyte. Again, so it can kill trees, but it can also grow on already dead trees. And there's another view of it, same thing. And there, you can barely see it in this photo, but there you do see sort of down to the right or in the center of the photo, but lower, this is an old hoof fungus that itself is being overgrown by mosses. But you can see that this actually started growing. Remember, I said that the underside of a fungus is facing the ground. So this started growing on this log after the log fell to the ground. We can tell that by the orientation of the fungus. So it was growing on already fallen, already dead wood. And here's birch polypore, which I'm sure you've seen. This is a common polypore fungus, Fomitopsis betulina, and it is a parasite. It does kill birch trees, but it's also a saprophyte, so it will also grow on already dead birch trees. And there's a closer look. Okay, here's a gorgeous one. Here is a beautiful one. This is called Northern Cinnabar polypore. And this one is a saprophyte, so it grows only on already dead wood. So I found this on a fallen log in northwestern Vermont. And this is what it looks like underneath. So I've been talking about polypores, and it's almost all of the species that I've shown you, with the exception of the first couple, are polypores. They are ones that if you look under species, if you look underneath the cap of the fungus, you will find these holes, these pores. And instead of gills, which is what you usually see when you look underneath one of the more delicate mushrooms that you see in the summertime, you see gills, or the common mushrooms that you've purchased in the grocery store. But in these ones, there are pores underneath instead. And the pores are where the spores are formed. So there are spores inside there, and they're released through the pores. Another one, perhaps this is the final one of these polypore mushrooms, but dryad saddle. You've probably seen this one too, or pheasant's back or hawkwing. And this one is both a parasite and a saprophyte. It's a beautiful, beautiful fungus, and I have seen it. I have seen it kill trees, and it also grows on already dying trees. So where I live, there is a beautiful example of dryad saddle that is at the base of a living tree, and that tree is now suffering. So it's called dryad saddle. Dryads are in Greek mythology are tree nymphs that you'll find a dryad sitting in a tree. And it's said that these things, these dryad saddles, can sometimes be so large that a dryad can sit on one. And you can see them. They can be really huge. And there it is underneath. So you can see just in the lower left, you can see the scales on the top of the fungus. So you can recognize it as the dryad saddle. And but you can see the pores underneath. This is actually the one that's right in my dooryard in this tree that is now dying. And here's another one called milk white toothed polypore, which is just a really, really fascinating fungus that is growing on this. In this case, it's growing on a down, very dead tree in the woods where I live. And you can see, if you look at the left-hand side of the photo, you can see the orientation. I actually changed the orientation of the photo so that it would look like this is upright. But as you can see, the trees were upright, but the log was not. Okay, so that's the fungi. That was fun. And let's move along. I'm going to show you. This is just going to be a brief pause. Okay, I want to show you a couple of things that used to be considered fungi, but that are not anymore. They're actually protists. They're considered protists, like in the same group of organisms as amoeba, for example. So I added this to the list. They're not fungi, they are protists. And these are the slime molds. And I'm only going to talk about 2 slime molds because most of the slime molds are not visible in the winter or in stick season even. But this one, the red ball slime mold, you might see the remains of this in this season. It's a common slime mold. And this one was growing on a dead down tree in the Crush Nature Preserve in Cambridge, Vermont. And here's one called the chocolate tube slime mold, which you can see the remains of in the winter, Stemonitis splendens. But most of these slime molds are very delicate and you don't see their so-called fruiting bodies in the winter. But this one you can see. This is one that I acquired from the commons. It's in the public domain. So that was a brief journey into the protists, but let's now look at the plants, the actual plants. And so we're going to look now first at bryophytes, mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. So just a little bit of information, a little bit of data on plants. I am trained as a botanist, so this is my area of knowledge. Worldwide, there are approximately 435 known species of plants. They comprise a small percentage of the total life on Earth. I'm not going to show you that, but invertebrates sort of claim that, and potentially other organisms. But of the plants, the flowering plants are the majority of the plants that are known, and both dicots and monocots. Monocots are things like grasses, and dicots are things like uh, the flowering plants that have broad leaves, and then conifers, a small part of the wedge of ferns, a small part, and bryophytes. So bryophytes comprise 4% of the plants in the world. There are approximately 18,000 species. But get this, the fun part of this is that in Vermont, bryophytes comprise 20% of the known plants. There are 624 species of mosses, mostly mosses, 426 of those, plus some liverworts and hornworts. These are numbers that we're actually learning more all the time, but these are approximately correct numbers as of now. So 20% of the plants in Vermont are mosses or liverworts or hornworts, whereas worldwide it's only 4%. So what does that mean? It's because it's moist here. We have moisture. So Vermont is a mossy place. The people who love ferns love to say that Vermont is a ferny place, but I say it's also a very mossy place, which gives me great delight. And the moss life cycle, I'm not going to go into this much, but I just want to show it to you briefly so that you understand what those things are that when you look at a moss, what the different parts are. So there's the green part, which is the plant body that produces gametes, that produces eggs and sperm. That's the gametophyte. And then once that egg is fertilized in the plant, in the female gametophyte, once the sperm land in there and the egg is fertilized, a new thing is formed, and then that is the sporophyte, and that is the part with the capsules that you see coming off the top. So that's actually a separate plant. It's growing on top of the gametophyte plant, but it is actually a separate thing. And that is where the spores are produced. And the spores are produced, and then they produce new gametophytes, and the cycle continues. So I'm showing you that just so that you understand what these things are that are coming out of the top of this. For example, this common haircat. This is a very common moss. You'll see this in many, many different habitats. Now, the common haircat moss. It's called haircat moss because there are two ages of cats. In this photograph, there are some very young ones, those very narrow orange and white ones. And then there are the darker ones, the sort of dark red ones that are sort of crinkled. And those are last year's sporophytes. And there's one with the hairy cap that you can see still on it. And it's the hairy cap that gives the plant its name. This is another one, just so you can see examples, and I haven't named this one, but just so you can see examples of different sporophytes on different species and what they look like. And there's yet another one on a different species. And here's one that I will name because it's got the cutest darn capsule, don't you think? This is called bristle moss or Orthotrichum species. We don't know which species it is. And this is just, I'm going to take a little brief aside for a second and say that there are plenty of apps out there that can help you identify things. I recommend Seek, which is part of iNaturalist, but they're not going to be able to identify all mosses. This one's very distinctive, but they aren't necessarily going to be able to identify them all to species, because identifying some mosses to species requires microscope work. So we're just going to call this a bristle moss in the genus Orthotrichum. And this is as far as my colleague Eric Sorensen could get when I asked him about this. And he doesn't not like to put names on things if he doesn't know. So this one is another one that I asked Eric to help me with, and he said this is curled bristle moss, Euloda crispa. This is something I know you've seen this. I know you've seen this little cushion moth on trees, and if you haven't, you will, because now you know how to look for it. So curled bristle moss, Euloda crispa, you'll see this throughout the winter. And by the way, in this photograph, the curled bristle moss is the pincushiony thing, but the other things that are growing on this tree trunk, there is actually a lichen here, and there is a liverwort over to the right in the middle of the tree trunk. And there's a closer look at Euloda crispa. You can see why it's called curled bristle moss. You can see the leaves are curled. Here's another species of Euloda. In this one, again, I showed it to, this is in the winter with snowflakes on it. It's another genus of Euloda, and you can see just barely sort of make out the capsules on this. And it's called tree cushion moss. And again, uncertain about the species, but Hutchinsii, Euloda hutchinsii is what we think it is. And then we have shingle moss, which is Neckera pinnata. And I love this one because this is very characteristic of old forests and big trees. So keep your eye out for this one in old forests. And there's another view of it on an old cedar tree. And then here's one called beautiful branch moss. And I'm just going to go now through a few species. These are species, a bunch of species that all grow in boreal forests and kind of all may to you at first glance look alike, but they're quite distinctive. This one is thanks to Mickey Colbeck for this lovely photo. This one's called brocade moss, and it looks like a little fern, doesn't it? Here's another one that kind of looks like a fern also, but you see how it's different from the brocade moss? It's a little more curly. This one is called knight's plume moss. Again, it grows in boreal forests. And then here's one that is called stair-step moss. Again, it's got sort of a similar form, but this one's called stair-step moss and grows in near the bases of trees. And there's another view of the stair-step moss. And do you see in this picture, can you see these little like, they almost look like worm heads or something like that, but those are the new leaves of this stair-step moss forming. So this picture was actually taken earlier in the year. And it's called stair-step moss because it forms a new frond or set of leaves every year, and they form a sort of stair-step pattern, but that's the new leaf forming. And here's one that actually does look quite distinctive. This one's called greater whipwort, or Basania trilobata. And this is actually not a moss, but is a leafy liverwort. But I'm showing it to you with the other mosses because it is common in boreal woods. If you look closely, you don't have to look close, but you can see that the brown twiglet things on the top of the liverwort are cedar leaves. And actually right in the center of the photo is a cedar sapling or cedar seedling with a little tiny new cedar leaf coming off of it. And there's a closer look, again with the cedar in the middle. Trilobata, three-lobed toothwort, because if you look closely at the leaves, each of them has three little lobes, a little hard to see in this photo. And then another one, this is back to the mosses, that is quite common that you'll see is pincushion moss. And here's another distinctive one, windswept moss. Another one that's quite distinctive here growing right out of the snow, tree moss. And then I'm going to take you briefly into a swamp to just look at the peat mosses, because that is, these are things that are just wonderful. And there are many, there are 20, more than 20 species of peat moss in Vermont. They're all different colors. There's a couple different species in this photo alone, different colors, different shapes, but they're all recognizable as peat moss. Now I'm going to make a shift into the liverworts. So the green thing in this photo is brocade moss, Calicladium imponens, but the red stuff is a leafy liverwort. So slightly different kind of setup from a moss, and we don't have time to really go into it, but just take it in. It's a slightly different way of reproducing and living. But here we have, again, the curled bristle moss, Eulota crispa, and then the red stuff in this photo is New York scalewort. And there's a closer look at it right in the center of this image here, a closer look at the New York scalewort, which is a liverwort. There's also lichens in this photo. And there's a different scalewort, a different liverwort called wall scalewort, Porella. There's tons of these. There's tons of them. And then finally in this group, one of the liverworts, a leafy liver, a thallose liverwort rather is the common liverwort called Marchantia. And thank you to Sue Williams for this photo. You don't see these that often. They're a little less common. There's only a handful of species of these, but this is a thallose liverwort, and you'll see these. So finally, and quite briefly, I'm just going to look at what happens when you cross a fungus with a plant. Well, you get a lichen. So lichens are a combination of a fungi and green plants, specifically algae. So this is a common one that you'll see on oak trees, the common green shield lichen. And if you take a cross section of that, look at that. What you'll see, look at the green stuff in there. You think of lichens as, where does that green color come from? Well, if you look at this cross section, you'll see, and here's just a diagram of it, that but just below the top, just below the surface, there's an algal zone where algae cells live inside the thallus or the body of the lichen. And there are three different kinds of reproductive structures on lichens, and just so you know that there are. I'm just showing you these, but we won't talk about them much. And there's generally three different kinds of life forms of lichens: crustose, foliose, and fruticose. And just now, I'm just going to show you some examples of things that you can see in the winter woods. Sunburst lichen, or perhaps candle flame lichen. Again, ID was not entirely certain, but there are those reproductive structures. And then a different lichen over to the right with gray, more of a gray color, the different species, but with similar reproductive structures. And there's a close-up look. This one, growing on a down stump, is called horizontal pelt lichen, a big leafy lichen. This is a different kind of pelt lichen, and there is its fruiting structure there. And this is actually, most of what you see in this photo is moss, but those brown things sticking out to the right, the body of the lichen, you can see at the top center, and then you can see the fruiting structures. When I say fruit, I mean it just in the broadest sense. They're not true fruits. And then here's one that I really love. This is lung lichen. Again, it's an indicator almost of old forests, old growth forests, and old trees. And this is so keep your eye out for this. It really needs to grow on complex bark, on deeply fissured bark trees. It also is sensitive to pollution. So this one has actually been used as an indicator of pollution in some, of air quality in some places. And here's another look at it with Bob Zano. Thanks to Bob Zano for this wonderful photo. And then I'm going to show you finally a few of the reindeer lichens. this photo is just the dog there is just for scale. This is a photo that was taken in Maine by my friend Chris Shorn on a in this kind of forest. You'll see, in very dry forests, you'll see these reindeer lichens, which might be the most familiar kinds of lichens to some of you. So the gray reindeer lichen, and then this is a British soldier's lichen, beautiful lichen. And also, there's two different lichens in this photo. The red tipped one is the British soldiers, and the other one is called the pixie cup. There's a close up look at the British soldiers, and it's those red tips is where the spores are produced. Another one closely related is called the dragon cup lichen. And here's one that's probably in the same genus, but again, I was unable to get a clear ID, but growing on a dead twig in the forest. And you've probably all heard of this one, old man's beard or beard lichen, Usnea species. So those are those are some of the common lichens that you will see, some of the most common lichens that you will see in the winter woods. And if you really don't want to be in the winter woods, well, go to Georgia. And this, as you know, this is Spanish moth. It looks a lot like old man's beard lichen, but this is a vascular plant, a flowering plant, not a lichen at all. And with that, I will close my formal comments, and let's open it up to questions. Sam, I bet you've been gathering some questions, and wonder if you want to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Liz. That was great. Yeah, I'll jump in with a few questions. There's some that we might be able to knock out kind of quickly. There was one about they were looking for the name of the book on mushrooms, I think, that you referenced earlier on. Do you remember that and what the author was?
There was a book that I recommended called Finding the Mother Tree. Do you mind? I'm going to just skip a few slides ahead here.
Sure.
And show you some.
Perfect.
Yeah, show you some resources. Okay, so there was Finding the Mother Tree is the book that I referred to by Suzanne Simard. Really highly recommend this book. As far as other books on fungi, there's a bunch of them, honestly. There's a lot of really, really great books, but a couple of them in this slide that I recommend. Entangled Life talks about this complex, what some people call the wood wide web of fungi in forests and how they function. Mycelium Running is also on that. A Fantastic Fungi is a sort of more of a popular book on how cool. I think there's been video about this, or film even. And then just some of the basic identification guides. This one at the bottom, more Robson and Trinci, the 21st Century Guidebook to Fungi. Mushrooms of the Northeastern United States. The one on the top that you can see is all moth, all beat up. That one I've had for years, but I love it. Orson Miller's book. And then right smack in the middle, there's a little tiny one called Myxomycetes, which is about the slime molds that I mentioned. And then on the top, Mushrooms of the Northeast. So those are some good resources on fungi.
Excellent. There's a question about the puffballs, and do they rely on animal interactions to release their spores, or would they release their spores another way or naturally?
Oh, good question. No, they do get released naturally. Even the lightest thing like some rain might trigger the release of spores. But surely, if a chipmunk crawls across that log, that's gonna help to release the spores. But they don't necessarily rely on it, but it sure helps. So if you an animal, if you walk through the woods and you poke one of those, you're doing a good thing for the puffball.
Nice. And then another one, speaking of things releasing, the you referenced um, the fungus that had the liquid coming out the bottom and how the pressure, like there was a question about what causes the pressure to make that liquid release from that one.
It's excessive moisture inside the mushroom itself. So, if it is drawing moisture from the tree, and it's just there's too much of it to be held inside the organism itself. And this happens sometimes with changes in temperature, and it happens in vascular plants too. You will see this phenomenon called guttation in regular green vascular plants, that at the edge of a leaf, sometimes you'll see it on strawberries, you'll see these little dots of moisture that are being pushed out as moisture is being gathered from the substrate, and it just can't basically fit inside the leaf or the mushroom, as the case may be.
There's a question about the lung lichen and how specifically it indicates pollution. Is it just is it just not as healthy when there's pollution, or yeah, how does it indicate that there might be air pollution around?
Yes, it doesn't thrive. It does not thrive. And this is the work that's been done on this has been mostly in Europe. So it's a widespread species throughout the world, throughout the northern hemisphere. And the work that's been done on this has been mostly in Europe, where there are they have found that it simply doesn't thrive and dies when there is. And I don't know which compounds, which pollutants in the air were studied. So I don't know the details of that, but yeah. So it's just, they've been able to compare different places, and the quantity, the abundance of the lung lichen, all else being equal. There's old trees here, there's old trees there, same kind of moisture, but just the difference in air quality yields a difference in the abundance of lung lichen.
Got it. This one's about propagation of fungi, but I'm just curious. This person asked, what's the best way to propagate fungi from dead wood to different dead wood of the same species? I don't know if you do much propagation or any tips on that.
Yeah, it's not something that I know a lot about, and there's a whole science of this, and lots of people who are doing it, who are propagating fungi on old wood, and through the process of you drill holes you get a log, you drill holes in the log, and you put an inoculant into the holes, which usually the easiest way to do it is to purchase the fungal inoculant from a company that does that. But actually figuring out how to propagate it without using the sort of commercial route, I don't know. I've never tried that.
Uh, we've got a few other questions that we've got time for. So yeah, are there certain trees that are particular to certain fungi? This person said thinking about forest with lots of dying black ash due to EAB, emerald ash borer, that is. So yeah, are there certain relationships that are more tighter with certain species?
There are some. For example, I showed you the birch polypore. That is a specific on birch. That polypore, that fungus, is specific to birch, and I don't know of any that are specific to ash. But one of the photos that I showed of turkey tail was on a dead ash, but I don't know that there's anything specific to ash. And there are some that are more common on hemlock. The what was the species? There are the one that I showed that was on hemlock is more common on hemlock, but it does grow on. So most of them are not particularly species specific. That's the short answer.
Gotcha. We had a couple questions about um, algae and lichen. So one is, are the algae that joins with fungus to create lichens from water originally, or something completely different?
Say that another way. algae.
I guess what's the origin of the algae that comes together with the fungus to create lichen? Like, does it exist separately, or is it always in conjunction
Oh, yeah,
with the
yeah,
fungus?
that's a great question. That's a great question. Yeah, some of the species of algae are specific. They only grow as partners in a lichen partnership. Yes, there are some
Oh wow.
that are specific that way. Yeah.
And that kind of speaks to this other question about, so if they're always in that present there, are they still considered their own species, even if they're only in that one? I know it's getting into very
I know.
specific,
I
but
know.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, it's a really great, it does call into question what is a species because lichens are named as species, right? They have each lichen has a genus and a species specific epithet. They are named as species, yet they must have both organisms, the fungal component and the algal component. And the algae sometimes, yes, do have their own names. It's a it's a great question, and it's like, yeah, what's a species?
Yeah. Um, well, I think we are running short on time, so I think we're gonna have to unfortunately call it there. But thank you so much for joining. I am going to send out a follow-up email with some links to some resources, a quick survey, and a link to the recording. It'll be up on our YouTube page. That'll be out hopefully by the end of the week. It takes a few days to process. We do have a couple events coming up. We have especially a webinar on swallows, which is going to be coming up soon. We also have some in-person events that Liz graciously put up on the screen here. So yeah, definitely keep an eye on vlt.org/events. And yeah, one last thing that I think the other slide Liz had was about donating. So if you like events like this, please consider donating to VLT. We do these events thanks to support from folks like you. So please consider making a donation at vlt.org/donate. And yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you all so much, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.